But to start out, the acceleration of the new Reich. This is, I just, you know, Teddy, what's his last name? Teddy Wilson over at Radical Reports. Radical Reports is just a great Substack newsletter. And he published one last week that had, I think it was Friday, that had just a whole series of links in it to, you know, things that, you know, what's going on right now. And so I went through those links and a few others and came up with, I think, what's a pretty good overview of what's going on in America right now. Keep in mind, most all of this, there are two exceptions, but outside of them, all the rest of this is stuff that has just happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's getting more and more brazen. I mean, this past weekend, there was a group of Nazis who marched through downtown Nashville, complete with swastikas, giant swastika flags, and racist chants. The media treated it like it was just another day. This stuff is getting normalized. Republicans who run Texas are in open defiance of the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal government over the border. That's the most significant challenge to federal authority since 1832 and the nullification crisis. And indeed, it's stirring up new pro-Civil War rhetoric among the racist base of the GOP. Andrew Womack, who's a televangelist and a big Republican supporter who called COVID a hoax hyped by liberals as an opportunity to come against Trump, recently on his podcast, Truth and Liberty, he said, quote, "I've actually had people say that if Trump was to be elected, if we got a conservative Congress, that they fear we would have another civil war. And you know what? I don't want a civil war. I don't know anybody that does, but would it be worth it to turn this nation back? I believe it would be worth it." Right. You know, I was in the middle of a civil war in Uganda in 1980. And in fact, one of my colleagues was shot dead. Her name was Anne. She was an Irish Red Cross worker. I just don't think anybody calling for a civil war has actually ever been in one. Because once you've seen what a civil war is like, you don't want them. Anyhow, Nikki Haley has been swatted twice. She's been physically attacked on stage. She's now being stalked at campaign events by Putin-loving Trump supporters who are outraged that she's calling for more military support for Ukraine. Jacob Ware, the author of Guns, God, and Sedition, told the CBC, quote, "I think intent to commit violence is high across the political spectrum, but especially on the far right." And he talks about our gun laws, you know, facilitating that. Just days after Maine Secretary of State Shayna Bellows ruled that Trump had committed sedition and couldn't be on the state ballot, she was swatted. Judges Tanya Chutkan and Arthur Engoron have been targeted by fascist Trump followers. A Trump devotee armed with a hand at Pelosi's home and tried to beat her husband Paul to death. On the campaign trail, Trump regularly refers to the incident as if it was some sort of victory for him, encouraging his supporters to do the same again. Another apparent Trump follower just last month murdered and decapitated his own father because he was a federal employee and therefore part of the deep state that Trump said we got to destroy. When the Washington Post looked into this problem of, the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, found that fully 23% of Americans agree with the statement, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. And the Washington Post looked into it and found that people running for Congress had to increase their spending on security by over 500% between the time Trump lost in 2020 and last November's midterms. The Brennan Center for Justice questioned 1,700 state and local elected officials in all 50 states and found that fully 40% have been either threatened or physically attacked in the 3 years since Trump lost. 90% said that they have been harassed, intimidated, or stalked. 1 in 10 state legislators report that a person with a weapon had tried to intimidate them on 1 or more occasions. 1 in 5 state officials and almost half of local officials say that because of these threats, they're unwilling to deal with controversial issues like abortion, immigration, or gun control. I mean, it just goes on and on. Last year, Republican anti-abortion extremist Philip Bunyo loaded his car with a hatchet, flares, matches, and bottles and cans filled with gasoline, and then drove to a reproductive care center, Affirmative Care Solutions, rammed his car into the front entrance, told police when he gets out of jail he's going to finish the job. He says he's part of this rescue group with a bunch of guys who have signed the justifiable homicide statement saying if you kill abortion doctors, that's all good. Last week, an openly Nazi group marched in front of the home of Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. In Idaho, 31 hateful white supremacists had the case against them dismissed because FBI agents and local prosecutors had accidentally bungled the evidence and interrogations. Last week, a Tennessee man was arrested for trying to participate in a plot with 2 Texas men to visit the southern border and murder Border Patrol agents, along with any immigrants who happened to be standing around. One of them was in possession of 6 semi-automatic firearms, 20 magazines, and around 1,800 rounds of ammunition. The border has been flooded with immigrants ever since Moscow Mike called a press conference and said, the U.S. border is wide open. Johnson, of course, the Speaker of the House, has openly promoted the Great Replacement theory. He said, here's what he said. This is, quote, if you're scratching your head, you've seen the video, you've seen droves of people, 2.4 million people coming over the border illegally, the president allowing it, the Democrats in charge of Congress are allowing it. The deal is they're going to turn them into voters. Right. That's not the deal, as you well know, I'm sure. But, you know, the Great Replacement theory, this was Hitler's theory about Jews. You know, they're out reproducing us. Recently, a convoy of armed white supremacists calling themselves God's Army made their way to the southern border, echoing Trump and Hitler's rhetoric that dark-skinned immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. The FBI had to evacuate the Border Patrol Processing Center because of threats from right-wingers. A few days later, Paul Fay Sr., identified as a malicious sniper, was arrested for planning to murder Border Patrol agents. He thought that if he could kill a few, that would start other white people going out and killing other federal employees. This was, you know, basically the premise of Turner Diaries, the novel that motivated and inspired Tim McVeigh. Fay said that it was the Great Replacement theory, you know, quoted by Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, that caused him to want to go murder these people. I mean, America's Voice is a news, you know, agency, and they said America's Voice has identified 120 members of Congress who amplified the replacement and invasion conspiracy in their official capacity just this last year. We've identified over 1,040 times top Republican candidates, officials, or outfits pushed the bigoted fiction in just the last year. We also identified this disturbing practice more than 700 times in 2022. In 2023, the House Republican majority brought 13 witnesses to congressional hearings to promote the Great Replacement theory, including one guy who'd been arrested on January 6th. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I'm not even halfway through the article of all this lengthy list of everything that has happened literally just in the last couple of weeks. This is called acceleration. These people are quite excited. They're quite giddy about the possibility that they could bring down the American government, they could end our pluralistic society, and they could replace our leadership with a fascist, with a strongman. Because these are frightened little people. These are people who, they're afraid of gay people, they're afraid of trans people, they're afraid of black people, they're afraid of Hispanic people, they're afraid of Asian people, they're afraid of Jews. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution by Leslie M. Chervinsky. This is from the introduction. At 11:30 in the morning on August 22nd, 1789, a large cream-colored coach pulled up to the front door of Federal Hall, 6 Wall Street in New York City. 6 matching, perfectly groomed horses pulled the elegant carriage with sparkling gold trim. The coachman, outfitted in crisp white and red-trimmed livery, jumped down from the back of the carriage and opened the door. An elegantly dressed man with powdered hair stepped down with a portfolio of papers under his arm. He towered over his companion, Henry Knox, the acting Secretary of War, and his slaves attending to the horses. His ornate coach and his imposing presence drew curious stares from strangers passing by on the street. He walked up to the front door of Federal Hall and was immediately announced. George Washington, the first President of the United States, had arrived for his first visit to the United States Senate. This was no ordinary meeting. 2 years earlier, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia had agreed that the Senate would advise and consent on treaties and other questions of foreign policy. But in practice, how the President and the Senate would interact remained for the first office holders to work out. Washington's relationship with the Senate was just one of countless governing details that he had to establish as the first president. Establishing precedent for every presidential action consumed his thoughts in the first few years of his administration. Not only would the American public and international audience judge his every action, but his successors would be guided by his choices. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of the Republic rested on Washington making the right decisions. He approached every new situation with caution and took action only after consulting with his advisors. His first visit to the Senate was no different. The tense relationship between Native American nations and the United States posed an immediate challenge after Washington's inauguration on April 30th, 1789. Most Native American nations had sided with the British during the Revolutionary War, recognizing the threat that American settlers posed to native lands. On November 15th, 1789, representatives from the national government, North and South Carolina, the Creeks, and the Cherokees planned to meet to discuss the controversial treaties signed between 1783 and 1789 and to negotiate a new treaty. Washington had to select the representatives to send on behalf of the federal government, another important first for the new president. At his August 22nd meeting, Washington planned to seek advice about what instructions he should give to the commissioners. Because he considered Native American relations to fall under the heading of foreign policy, he followed the constitutional guidelines calling for him with the Senate. On May 25th, 1789, less than a month after his inauguration, Washington sent to the Senate all of the United States' previous treaties with Indian nations, along with a number of supporting documents. After a brief discussion, the Senate postponed its consideration of these papers. At the beginning of August, the Senate created a committee to meet with Washington. That committee planned the minute details of the upcoming meeting, down to where Washington would sit and how he would enter the chamber. On August 20 and 21, Washington nominated commissioners to negotiate with the Southern Indians. On August 21st, he sent an official note to the Senate announcing his visit the next day to discuss the terms of the proposed treaty. When Washington and Knox arrived at Federal Hall at 11:30 a.m., the doorkeeper announced their arrival. Washington sat at the front of the chamber, and Knox took the chair to the right. Washington handed his remarks to Knox, who in turn handed them to Vice President John Adams. Adams read the statement, but as Senator William McClay from Pennsylvania recalled, the senator, quote, could not master one sentence of it, end quote. Adams was not known for his public speaking skills, but the senator's struggles weren't entirely his fault. The Senate gathered for their work in the large chamber that occupied the first floor of Federal Hall. Because of the August heat in New York City, the doorkeeper had opened the windows in search of a cooling breeze. But along with fresh air, Wall Street's pedestrians, carriages, peddlers, and horses flowed into the Senate chamber. The clamor overpowered Adams' voice, so few senators could make out the words that Washington had so carefully crafted. After a few complaints, Adams repeated the speech from the beginning. Washington's remarks offered a brief synopsis of the current diplomatic state between the United States and the Southern Indians and posed 7 questions for the Senate to answer with an aye or a no. Adams finished his recitation and sat. The seconds ticked by as the senators remained in awkward silence. A few shuffled papers or cleared their throats. McClay speculated in his diary that his colleagues were so intimidated by Washington's presence in the Senate chamber that they cowered in shameful silence. Eager to show that they could be active participants in the creation of foreign policy, McClay stood up and suggested referring the Washington 7 questions to committee for discussion in detail. Washington then lost his temper, stood out at, "This defeats every purpose of my coming here." The senators fell into a stunned hush before Washington acquiesced to McClay's suggestion and offered to return to the Senate a few days later. Although he did not return the following Monday, his first visit to the Senate was an inauspicious executive legislative relationship.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Wednesday. It's midweek. It's time for Middays with Mark. We'll get to that in just a moment. Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the entire first hour here today, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. In the second hour of our program is the Republican argument against women voting starting to get traction. And by the way, some of their strategies are working quite effectively to prevent women from voting. I'll tell you about that in the second hour. Also, has the Republican Party become a full-fledged anti-sex movement? This is totally weird, even right down to Project 2025. I'll tell you about that. And also in the second hour, it turns out that Donald Trump's Truth Social, you know, this whole little money-making, multi-billion-dollar money-making thing, apparently wouldn't have happened without money from a Russian oligarch. Seriously. I'll tell you about that in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, Jack Smith's response to Aileen Cannon's craziness. We discover where it came from. And also, you know, how she's actually been pretty sneaky on this thing. She has not issued a ruling, in quotes, merely advisories, suggestions, and questions. And those things can't be appealed. Only rulings can be appealed. So Jack Smith is kind of stuck. I'll give you all the details on that at the third hour of the program. Also, even if you make Donald Trump $6 billion, he still delights in screwing you. Yes, he is suing the guys who started Truth Social to prevent them from getting their little 8% share of the stock of the company. I'll give you the details on that in the third hour. And is there no bottom? Donald Trump lies about the GOP's favorite murder victim. It's just crazy. All right, to start out our program today and for our first hour, Congressman Mark Pocan is going to be with us. Middays with Mark, or is with us, Middays with Mark. He's the U.S. Congressman who represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's the current member and chair emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's the co-founder and co-chair of the Labor Caucus and the chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus. Pocan, pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him or X him or whatever they call it these days at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program. It's always so nice to have you with us.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. We've had a big election yesterday in Wisconsin. Our spring election included the primaries for Biden and Trump, which, of course, both won. But it's good to be home and getting around the district and hearing really on the ground what's important looking at November.
I understand Trump lost about almost 20% of the vote in Wisconsin. And what was the other state that had this? Connecticut, I think, primary yesterday.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There were more Republican votes overall than Democratic votes, so that's something, you know, we should be looking at and trying to make sure we're understanding. But he lost a lot of votes to people that clearly have dropped out of the race. So while Dean Phillips was still on the ballot in Wisconsin, it was very small. There was I'm not sure the final vote total, but about 48,000 uninstructed votes in Wisconsin. But in Donald Trump's primary, clearly a lot of people still are not happy that Donald Trump's the nominee.
Yeah, I totally get that. Also, there was a new report that was published yesterday by the Economic Policy Institute going all the way back to, I think Nixon. And what they found is that under Democratic presidents, the economy always, at least in the modern era, I think you could take this back to 1929, always does better. And I'm guessing Democrats are going to be talking about this.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Yesterday, Donald Trump was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Monday, Joe Biden's in Madison, Wisconsin, my district. And we're going to be talking about, you know, what this administration and the Democrats in particular a couple years ago did to help reduce costs. And, you know, I think when you look at things like the Inflation Reduction Act and investing in things like infrastructure to create good paying jobs, there's a lot we've got to talk about. And clearly the economy does better when Democrats are in charge. We're not looking at just the top few percent. We're looking at a much larger pool of people trying to help when we're in office. And, you know, especially a session like this where so little is happening, I think we've got a lot to be able to talk about on Monday when the president's in the state.
And finally, I'm wondering what your message is to President Biden with regard to Israel. My message would be, if you don't stop going along with Benjamin Netanyahu, he's going to destroy your presidency and he's going to destroy your candidacy. I am getting so many calls from Democrats who are so pissed off that we just shipped more 2,000-pound dumb bombs, which is exactly what he's been using to destroy Gaza, you know, et cetera. It's just, well, what say you, sir?
I've just had 4 town halls in places like Monroe, Wisconsin, population, I don't know, 10, 11,000. Edgerton, Wisconsin, a few thousand. Mazomanie, Wisconsin, under a couple thousand. And Sauk City, Wisconsin. And the number 1 and 2 issues that people want to continue to talk about throughout the town hall were Ukraine funding, which the president's completely in the right place with, and Gaza. And this is one where the president's not. I think people are ready for a divorce with Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not adding much to the relationship. It's not saying anything against the Israeli people. But, you know, we should be supporting both the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. But Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing that. I mean, the most recent attack on Jose and Chef Andreas's project for delivering relief is just one more super visible incident of how terrible the execution of what's going on in Gaza has been happening by Benjamin Netanyahu. And people want something different. Members of Congress want something different. But I'll tell you, being home for a couple weeks like this, doing those town halls, I've relayed this to the Biden campaign. I'm concerned. You know, that 48,000 almost uninstructed votes in a state where Joe Biden won by just under 21,000 should be significant and be looked at very closely.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, so shall we pick up calls?
Sure. All
righty. Brad in Tampa, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Hi, Thom Hartmann. This is Brad in Tampa. How are y'all doing today?
What's your question for the congressman, Brad?
So I have written a bill. I'm just a citizen here in Central Florida, and I haven't got a complete title for it, but I'm calling it Public Access to Representatives of 2024. And basically, the bill states that any senator or representative that spends time with lobbyists or special interest groups must spend an equal amount of time with their constituents on a town hall. And I see, Congressman, that I just heard that you did several town halls. I'm very glad about that. But I think there's a big disconnect with our representatives and the public, especially on the right, when it comes to them not sitting down with their constituents. So this bill would just say, hey, if you are going to go and spend a night gala at a $10,000 plate dinner with the NRA, that it takes 3 hours, that you must, within a month, spend 3 hours with a sit-down, free to the public in your state or your district. Constituents can come and talk to you and ask you questions.
Interesting idea. Congressman, your thoughts?
Yeah, Brad, I think it might be unenforceable, but I completely understand your sentiment. I mean, part of our problem is because of the Republican leadership in the House being unable to govern, right? Last year, we lost 4 whole weeks home between August and Christmas. We were home 1 week, Thanksgiving week, because of speaker elections and not being able to pass a budget bill. You're right. I mean, part of the problem is, you know, if we're not home, we're not able to have town halls. That's why getting around right now, I've been ecstatic to be able to do these town halls. Nothing for me is better than to connect and hear these things so that I can make sure I'm representing the district, and anyone should be doing that. So I'm with you on the sentiment. I'm not sure a law is ever going to work, and certainly not the way I think that you're hoping, but I totally get what you're saying.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's 14 minutes past the hour. You can find Congressman Pocan's website at Pocan, Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark, picking up your calls right after this. And welcome back, David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Sir, I want to get into the ethanol, methanol, corn thing. I remember back in the day when Grassley and the whole Farm Bill, they pushed ethanol over methanol. There was a physicist that testified in front of Congress that there was actually a slightly higher BTU per milliliter out of that methanol than ethanol, but ethanol won out as a food crop. And what the result of that was you had Cargill and Monsanto and all these corporate companies jump in and make these huge conglomerate farms.
So what's your question for the Congressman, David?
All the farms. Well, the whole, because this is before Congress right now, Congress and the Senate, the whole argument of ethanol and methanol. We were diverting ethanol under the auspices of this was helping energy.
So, David, what's your question for the Congressman?
Energy. How can we reverse this situation where we have these monopolistic companies that have swapped?
I got it. Congressman, you want to speak to this issue?
Yeah, I think he's going in perhaps a direction that's not even possible to try to change at this point. I think, there is an alternative with ethanol right now to try to have less reliance on oil, particularly foreign oil. Also, the pollution that comes, I think, through that fossil fuel industry. I think your problem is even when you change a little bit, you have to change the pumps that do anything. I just don't think, David having a kind of more of a theoretical conversation is probably going to ever happen in the practical application, given how much you'd have to change to try to do anything when we're really trying to move to a direction of electric vehicles and completely avoiding any kind of need for fossil fuels in the future. So I think it's more of a theoretical conversation that's probably a long, maybe somewhat boring one for radio.
Yeah, I get it. It doesn't, to produce ethanol, you got to produce corn. To produce corn, you've got to transport fertilizer. You've got to big tractors and combines. You've got to sow it. You've got to water it. You've got to harvest it. It's got to take more than 1 gallon of oil or diesel or gasoline to produce a gallon of ethanol. Isn't the math on this just absurd?
Not necessarily, and plus there's a little bit more to it, right? At different times, relying on foreign oil versus non-domestic. I think at the end of the day, we need to keep the eye on the prize, which is trying to move to the electric vehicles and what we're doing to completely reduce that reliance. In the meantime, ethanol, I do think still works because it also helps the farmers on crops, because sometimes that's a very volatile, economically for those families to keep family farms, not to have corporate farms. But honestly, I think the whole conversation would be making sure that we're keeping to those renewable standards so that we have enough vehicle charging stations so we can incentivize more on those vehicles and completely reduce the need for the fossil fuel straw that we're drinking from for vehicles in the country.
Are we starting to see that build out happen?
Yeah, absolutely. We had 500,000 electric charging stations in the infrastructure bill that passed. We're seeing, I think, the car companies seem to be getting where the direction's going. Certain states have done stronger standards. So I think yes, but we got to keep the focus there.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with you in 60 seconds after I read an ad over on the commercial side of the program. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour and Middays with Mark. Jim in Greenwood, Wisconsin. Hey, Jim, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Congressman, I just wanted to say, love the representation you give us here in Wisconsin, and keep up the great work. My question is Wisconsin voters last night approved 2 Republican-backed measures that will change the way elections are run in this pivotal battleground state. What's your opinion? Will this hurt us the way it's run now or help us?
Yeah, Jim, thanks for your comments. I appreciate that. So we had 2 referendums that the gerrymandered Republican legislature wrote. So that already should tell you everything. They made it purposely confusing in language to basically say, let's keep big money out of elections. They don't mean in campaign contributions. They mean money that we were given to have mail drop boxes, and legislature isn't funding to have efficient elections. But I think what was really even more dishonest than the language and the process was groups like the MacGyver Institute, a conservative think tank, did ads that popped up all the time on my social media, tell the NRA they can't buy our elections. And clearly this wasn't about the NRA. This was about, money that was going to buy drop boxes that more people could participate. Jim, end of the day, I think, people who, just kind of read it said, I don't want big money in elections. That's kind of where the vote was. But it was a disingenuous ploy by the gerrymandered legislature that fortunately we have new maps for in Wisconsin, and hopefully we can get a different majority or at least really tighten the margins to make it more effective in the future. Will it hurt us? We're not going to have outside money to help do some of the things that the state's refusing to fund, but I think it's more of a general statement against money in politics.
Diane in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I love both of you, and thanks for everything you do. I want to talk just a little bit about this Advantage plan issue, because I'm on an Advantage plan. I got it 8 years ago before I ever heard anybody talking about why I shouldn't. And I got lucky because I have a good plan, and I've always gotten care, and I don't pay too much. But if the Democrats do get elected, and we do end up getting rid of the Advantage plans, right now, if I wanted to go back, like as soon as I heard that this was an issue, I wanted to see if I could get on a supplement, and I couldn't. Once you have an Advantage plan, that's it. So any changes that get made really need to take that into consideration. And the other thing is that the supplemental plans are way more expensive. And I think there's a lot of seniors, like when we were looking at them, the reason I didn't get one was because I think it was $460 a month. And that, that's a lot of money when you're on a fixed income.
Congressman?
Yeah. Diane, thanks for your comments. And, I completely agree. Any changes that we make are going to have to take that into consideration. Right now, there's a penalty to have to go to go to Medicare, and we've got to take care of all of that. I think the real problem is we just want to warn people, because too many constituent complaints we get, and we hear stories on Thom's program all the time, people not getting the care, getting refused through prior authorization on these plans. But I don't think anyone will stop a private insurance plan. They just probably should be Blue Cross Blue Shield Advantage, Humana Advantage plan that you can have, rather than pretending they're Medicare. And just to the supplemental question, you're right. That's one of the things that that these Advantage plans tell you'll get, even if you're not going to get the care and you're in network potentially on them. That's one of the issues. But if the overcharging they do right now to the government, I think the last year that we kept track was $140 billion of overcharging. So this is more expensive than Medicare. If you just took that savings, you could cover supplemental insurance for every single person on Medicare. So there's ways to do this right and make it better that doesn't just put money in insurance companies' pockets. And that's how we would write any changes. So you're very right to raise the issue, very much on our radar screens. We just want to warn people that, sometimes that little bit of savings or that extra gym membership that you get out of a Medicare Advantage plan, if it means that they're going to turn down your care through prior authorization like they do millions of times a year, that could be, life-threatening. And we just want people to know all the facts before they sign up for any plan.
John in Atlanta, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We just have a little over a minute, by the way. Quick one.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Question concerning the documents case in Florida. The theft took place in D.C. Why isn't it being tried there?
I'm not sure I'm not sure where the case that was mentioned. I apologize.
Oh, he's talking about the so-called documents case, the espionage case that Judge Cannon is doing?
I heard a different name. I apologize. I don't know. I truly, there's jurisdictional issues, and it just falls within the jurisdictional issues of the courts. But I couldn't tell you any more than that, John. Sorry.
Yeah. Congressman, I just have 30 seconds here. Do you, you're out there talking to people, doing your town halls and whatnot. Is it your sense that Donald Trump is being helped or hurt by all of the charges that are being filed against him?
In 4 town halls, I don't think it's come up, to be honest.
Wow.
But to be fair, Tom, these are
not talking to Republicans.
Well, at least 2 of them were official town halls. 2 were a little more sponsored by organizations. I don't talk politics at those because I'm on the official dime, so I don't do electoral politics. So maybe that's why. But no one has proactively brought it up in a question that I've had to respond to.
Yeah. Okay. 27 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. The Chair Emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus will be back with your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right back on the other side of this break here at the bottom of the hour with more of your calls for Representative Mark Pocan. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. "Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too?" David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, "two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans," end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, Chair Emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. And Tom in Tomahawk, Wisconsin, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Representative Pocan. I was wondering, Can you do anything about we're losing a lot of younger voters due to the laws and what's going on in Gaza. And it's like we're going to lose it if they don't get these young people back. You might be able to contact our President Biden and maybe talk to him about it, please?
Yeah, I hear you, Tom. First of all, last night I actually met with UW-Madison College Dems. And, we talked about a number of issues that students care about, college affordability, student loan forgiveness. There's a lot of things that people definitely agree with the president on. But there is a disconnect. I would argue, though, it's not just with younger voters, though, based on my town hall experience across Wisconsin, and you're from Wisconsin, Tom, that there are a lot of voters who are concerned about seeing over 32,000 dead people in Gaza, 70% of which are women and children, clearly are not Hamas. The devastation on the ground to buildings there, 2 million people displaced within the country, and we can't get aid to them. The fact the United States can't bring aid in through normal channels through the Israeli gates, instead we have to drop it by air or bring it by water, is quite honestly ridiculous. And I'm hearing it a lot. And I've mentioned it to the Biden campaign and to the administration. And the president's coming to my district Monday, and I've got the feeling I'm going to be mentioning it to the president himself, because I have a lot of concerns. And it's not just Wisconsin. I'm hearing this from people who represent districts in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, Georgia, and other swing states. And I agree with you, Tom. I think that, people do care about what's happening. And I think what Tom and I talked about at the very beginning of the program, just very briefly, I think it's time for a divorce from Benjamin Netanyahu. That's not a divorce from the Israeli people or the Palestinian people. I think, by and large, they want peace in the region. But Benjamin Netanyahu has engaged a very corrupt, I think, collective punishment on the people of Gaza, and it does need to be called out more by this country.
Tom, in Irvine, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, sirs. And don't forget, Tom, Congressman Pocan is a member of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and it is expanding to, I think, 22 members, up from the last time I spoke with Congressman Pocan.
That's great.
And at the end of February, Congressman Pocan, there was a vote on H.R. 6544, the Atomic Energy Advancement Act, and my representative, Katie Porter, voted against it along with 35 other Democrats, and I support that position. It passed the House overwhelmingly, but probably won't pass the Senate, which I think is a good thing. May I respectfully ask you why you voted yes, and would you reconsider your position? Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, I don't remember the bill offhand. I'd have to take a look at it. We get, as you know, about 10,000 bills a year, so I couldn't tell you offhand.
Okay, Glenn in Kalama, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks, Tom. Congressman, it looks like we're going to have a pretty good election in terms of the House of Representatives. And so I was wondering if any of you are considering or working on legislation to repeal Citizens United or to repeal the Republican tax cuts and stuff like that Tom talks about.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. First of all, my aunt and uncle, both who have passed, used to live in Kalama, Washington. So I love that area as well as where Tom's at in Portland, beautiful parts of the country. Glenn, first of all, I wouldn't get ahead of ourselves. We do feel that with this incompetent Republican majority, we certainly are giving people a clear choice. Marjorie Taylor Greene running the House of Representatives or Hakeem Jeffries. It's pretty clear. However, elections have consequences, and a lot is riding on November. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We have November to focus on. Having said that, the very first bill we've done as Democrats the last several sessions was H.R. 1, which gets rid of Citizens United, and was voted on by the House, by the Dems. I think every Dem voted for it, is sending it forward. So completely that's on our agenda, and I think many of the ways to get rid of those Trump tax cuts and bring revenue in again in a responsible way. So I think 83% of the tax cuts went to the top 1% and added to our nation's debt under Donald Trump is absolutely on the table as well. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. November is going to be really key. And, for some people, this is a rerun election, and people don't like reruns like when you see a TV show the first time. We have to have turnout, or else we could have consequences out of that. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's focus on November.
Anthony in St. Augustine, Florida. Anthony, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Anthony?
Hello, yes. I got a question for Congressman Pocan.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a question, but I was wondering do you agree with me that we need to reassess how we sanction?
Anthony, you just vanished.
Sanction other countries. They'll just like draw. They'll float towards China or Russia, as far as like economic.
You're
and
talking about like our
political.
sanctioning of Cuba, for example.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Venezuela.
Cuba.
Okay, Congressman, your thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if the question is specifically about Cuba, it might be different than the general. On Cuba, it makes no sense to have them on a terrorist list. I was there a year ago, December. It's having a lot of huge economic problems there. And 2% of the population, Tom, in a year's time left Cuba and came to the United States. That's, very few people know that statistic and need to understand that. That's a foolish, antiquated policy that should absolutely be gone. I think in general, though, because the United States still is such an economic power, we do have some of our best ability to do things through sanctions rather than through war. And I'd much rather see us, look at that where we can. Any kind of, obviously, diplomacy is even preferred above that. But I just wanted to address that a little bit in case he was going a little broader. But specifically to Cuba, it's absolutely ridiculous where we're at right now with our U.S. policy towards Cuba.
Ray in Salem, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's Astoria, Oregon, by the way.
Oh, okay. I'll fix it.
A while back, the Lifeline program went away, the support for telephone for low income. And I got a card in the mail the other day saying, due to the lack of additional funding from Congress, the Affordable Connectivity Program will end in April. Households enrolled, blah, blah, blah. So why are all these little programs that help the low-income people going away?
Yeah, Ray, and it's not just that. I mean, we put out a lot of additional funds during COVID because people needed some additional support, and that money ended, and unfortunately, a lot of people are feeling that impact. This Republican Congress has not been functioning. I mean, fortunately, we were able to finally get our 12 appropriation bills done 6 months late, and they had to come and get Democratic votes, so we were able to stop some of the most draconian cuts. But they were proposing, they said they across the board on their bills, it was a 22% cut, Tom, but they wouldn't cut defense or veterans affairs. So really, it was more like a 30% cut across the board. Bills they actually put on the floor for a vote and passed before we got serious recently in passing the appropriation bills. They had a 41% cut to the Department of Agriculture, hurting our family farmers across the country. So it's really just this MAGA dogma that they're voting on, whether it makes sense or not, and usually not. And that's part of the problem, Ray, is programs that have been, I think, long respected and supported, like the connectivity program you're talking about, has been at risk because of how the Republicans have operated.
Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Mark. Oh, God, it's so good to hear you. I'm glad to be in your district. I got to say, like a lot of Democrats, we are grieving over what is happening in Gaza and really tortured over what our country is doing in sending these bombs at minimum. Whatever Biden's position is, please tell him any way you can. He needs to explain to the American people why he is doing what he is doing. I agree. Divorce Netanyahu, he's a monster. Okay, it's all about politics with that guy. But to tell Biden to look at what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did with the fireside chats, explaining the most complex, difficult things that were going on in our country at the time, I would really, really appreciate that, and I think we could all benefit with it, and we could agree with it or not agree with it. But right now, all we're getting are these platitudes, and they're not working.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. So two things. One, I agree. The fireside chats, especially Joe Biden, who's such a genuinely sincere, empathetic person, it's a perfect format for him. And I don't know why he doesn't use it more often. I agree on that. But also, I'll tell you, this is the other point. Joe Biden does not wear every issue on his sleeve when he's dealing with issues, especially diplomatically. I've learned that about him. And I often learn, a lot more when I talk to, some of the departments, Department of State, et cetera, on what's happening. And I know that Joe Biden is doing more than what is out there. Excuse me. However, the American people need to know that as well, right? And I'm looking forward to seeing him on Monday and having a conversation, because having come out of all these town halls in the district, and I didn't even do it in Madison, Kathy, where we have even more people who believe this. In my more rural areas, this is just as strong as other areas, and we need to get that across, that people are concerned.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark, our every other week meeting with Congressman Pocan, where he picks up your calls. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, and we will be back with more of your calls for the Chair Emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Middays with Mark. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Representative Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Joy in Issaquah, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just had a question regarding the elephant in the room. Why is none of the lawmakers, congressmen, or anyone talking about Project 2025 and how they're going to got the executive branch, invoke the Insurrection Act, no marriage except men and women, no gay rights, religious like edict all through the document, or discuss the 4 pillars, which are simple and quick. We know fear is a motivator, so why aren't we, jolting the people who will be affected to do something and speak about this, because it will gut our democracy and it will be no more. Why are we just pretending like it's not on the horizon or coming? I mean, what?
Joy, I do see it, quite honestly. I also see us talking about the Republican Study Committee, which I think is even more important because it's Republican members of Congress. It's a pretty big caucus who proposed raising the retirement age to 70. I mean, these are all things that are very likely going to be on the plate if the Republicans have a House and Senate majority in the White House. So I don't know where you're not seeing it. I am seeing it in some places, but I think even more important than one conservative think tank's proposal is things like the Republican Study Committee, which is a ton. I think it might be the biggest caucus among the Republicans in the House, proposing raising the retirement age to 70. Our money we've all paid in all of our life, and now they want to make you have to wait longer to be able to get access to it. Things like that, plus other agenda items of theirs, I think are absolutely worthy of talking about, and I certainly am, and I hear others as well.
Blake in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking my call. It's a pleasure to speak to a representative, maybe for the first time in my life. And I have a rhetorical question and a challenge for the future of my democracy. Who was Biden's biggest contributor to the campaign? He's in the pocket of Israel, and the warmongering may not stop. because he believes the Build Back Better deep down inside is probably Build Back Better bullets and guns. You know, it's part of our economy. This is the truth that we can't get away from, that the fat cats.
Okay. Rant noted. Congressman, you want to respond?
Yeah, Blake, I disagree with you in that I think, from my many conversations, and I have had many conversations on this subject with the Biden campaign, with the Biden administration, with other members of Congress, I truly believe this is just, Joe Biden, in my opinion, living maybe how we had a position with Israel maybe a few decades ago and trying to stand by an ally. But this ally, I liken it to, Netanyahu is not representative of the Israeli people. And I think, we have to keep saying that. But if you have a friend who's had too many drinks, you make sure they don't get in the car and drive. And that's what you do as a friend. In this case, Benjamin Netanyahu is hurting Israel and perhaps widening the conflict in the region, and we have to speak out. And you don't just continue to provide support, because part of that support is telling them what they're doing is dangerous and hurtful.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. It's 10 minutes before the hour. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan, and we'll be right back with more of your calls. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here for Congressman Mark Pocan. Ricardo in Syracuse, New York. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, guys, or good afternoon. I was born in Puerto Rico. Anyways, and I have several friends that live in Florida. I used to live in Florida. And many of my friends literally will vote for Trump before they vote for Biden, which is ridiculous. It's out of my mind. I have tell them about how he wanted to take our residency out. He threw papers of toilet papers when Maria hit Puerto Rico. Why you guys do not use this against him? Like, all of this stuff that he ever done is like gone with the wind. We have videos of him. I think they should have more videos of him doing things like that to the Hispanic community. I would take your answer on the radio. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yeah, I hear you, Ricardo. I think one of the most memorable dumb moments of the Donald Trump presidency was when he threw, it wasn't toilet paper, it was paper towels out to help people who've just been hit by a hurricane. I mean, and then he did his little marker hurricane thing. And so many issues, you're right. The problem is for MAGA, they don't care. He can be as idiotic as possible. I think he gets a lot of people look at him as an entertainer, not necessarily as a politician, but they're okay because of these values, I guess is the best word, that he represents. So, yeah, we do it. I've seen it plenty of times. I think really we just need to talk about where he's now, because he's far more extreme now than he was when he was throwing paper towels, quite honestly. And I think we need to let people know that even the old entertaining Donald Trump isn't so entertaining anymore, because the views he has are truly damaging to the average family in this country. And we have to have people vote in their best interest. And certainly he won't be. And I think we need to really go back to those core economic kitchen table issues a whole lot more and drive those home.
Angelique in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to add my own experience that turned out, fortunately for me, and thanks to you, well, with the whole Advantage thing. I had an Advantage plan for 3 years through last year, and I have a twin sister, and when we both reached Medicare age, she told me, absolutely do not get that. And, you know, she was a director of nursing for a home health agency for years, and she said we had to have 2 full-time registered nurses on the phone all day arguing with people, insurance companies, for people who had Advantage plans because they couldn't get the proper home health that they should have been able to get. And, you know, the fact was, I, too, thought I just had Medicare, and, you know, I signed up because I could get a free gym membership, just something frivolous. Anyway, long story short is, because of and I'm getting older, I got real afraid, and I was able to, this woman that called earlier said, I don't know why, but I was able to switch after 3 years on an Advantage plan to a supplement. I did go through the AARP, which, if you remember, you know, you got supposedly some kind of. And
Angelique, I'm almost out of time here.
Okay, I wound up with a plan for $95 a month, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm just grateful, and I think people should just keep trying to get, and I think if I could get off of Advantage, I don't know why anybody else couldn't.
Okay,
so that's what I wanted to say. Thank
Great message. Thank you, Angelique.
Representative Pocan, I appreciate being able to listen to a Democratic congressman. We don't have many around here. Actually, we have none. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Angelique, and I'm glad you were able to. And, you know, it's interesting you said that about nursing, because I had at one of my town halls a retired nurse who looked into it and was told, absolutely do not go to Medicare Advantage. So people who actually work in the area know this. We just want to help as many people. And if you've been on the program less, it's much easier to be able to get off of it. But we're going to do our best to fix it for everyone in the long term.
Congressman, I just have 20 seconds left. Thoughts on the coming weeks?
I think we're back fully in session next week in the House and Senate. So,
do you think we're going to get Ukraine aid?
How we get that, we're not sure. But I'll tell you, that came up a lot in the town halls. That and Gaza were my number 1 and 2 issues. So when we get back, hopefully there's some movement. We've got some good news on how to get that on the floor.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much, Congressman, for always dropping by every other week here with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Great talking with you.
Take
Congressman Mark Pocan. On the other side of this break, is the Republican argument against women voting gaining new traction? Also, has the Republican Party become a full-fledged anti-sex movement? And Russians are keeping Trump afloat again. I'll tell you about all those stories right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Book today is America on Fire by Dr. Elizabeth Hinton. The subtitle, The Untold Story of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s. I'm reading from the introduction. On a cold Monday at the start of February, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond sat down at a whites-only lunch counter at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. A waiter refused to serve the young men and suggested they order takeout instead. The four North Carolina A&T students remained at the counter. The store manager approached and asked them to leave. Still, they did not move. A police officer arrived, slapping his nightstick in his hand in an attempt to intimidate. Rather than allow the students' offense against Jim Crow to continue, the manager of the store closed the store for the day. 24 black students returned on Tuesday. Over 50 black students and 3 white students participated in the sit-in on the next day, Wednesday, February 3rd, 1960. News of the protests spread, and soon the sit-in movement had expanded to 55 cities and 13 states. By April, over 50,000 students were involved. Conceived and organized entirely by young people, the sit-in movement ultimately led to the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was run by activists such as John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. As a Fisk student, Lewis participated in the sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, and he would go on to steer the Freedom Riders in the summer of 1961 and speak at the March on Washington in 1963. Carmichael joined the sit-in movement as a high school student and would famously call for Black Power at the SNCC rally in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1966. Together, Lewis, Carmichael, and tens of thousands of other young black Americans signaled that their generation was prepared to risk their lives for freedom and equality. From Greensboro onward, the sit-ins helped build momentum and support for racial justice. The students in Greensboro engaged in a nonviolent protest to demand full integration, the right to vote, equal educational opportunities, decent jobs, protection against white supremacist terrorism, and an end to police violence. These were the central aims of the civil rights movement more broadly. By the end of the decade, black students at North Carolina A&T State University were still protesting, but now they were destroying property, assaulting police officers, and shooting in the direction of law enforcement, if not coming close to killing cops in self-defense. In May 1969, after black students at Greensboro's James B. Dudley High School were arrested, brutalized, and tear gassed by police during a series of protests against arbitrary disciplinary measures, A&T students came to the teenagers' defense. The confrontations between local police and black high school and college students led authorities to call the National Guard to A&T's campus, unleashing violence and repression that ended in the killing of sophomore Willie Grimes. A pivotal stop on the road to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, by the end of the decade, Greensboro was a site of sustained violence. It was far from unique in this regard. Between 1964 and 1972, but especially between 68 and 72, the United States endured internal violence on a scale not seen since the Civil War. Every major urban center in the country burned during those 8 years. Violence flared up not only in archetypal ghettos, including Harlem and Watts, and in majority black cities such as Detroit and Washington, D.C. It appeared in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Gary, Indiana, in Seattle, Washington, and countless places in between. Every city, small or large, where black residents lived in segregated, unequal conditions. In the North and the South, the East and the West, the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, black people threw rocks and bottles at police, shot at them with rifles, smashed the windows of businesses and institutions, hurled firebombs, and plundered local stores. These events, what we commonly call riots, or what people who are to the left of center sometimes refer to as civil disturbances, caused hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage. Most immediately, they shaped the lives of the store owners whose businesses were destroyed, of the parents who lost their teenage sons to the police, and of the firefighters and cops who were harmed or killed. But ever since, Americans have been living in a nation and a national culture created in part by the extreme violence of the 1960s and the early 1970s. The aftershocks of that era have, at times, taken the form of mass violence to which all Americans have been witness. In Miami in 1980, in Los Angeles in 1992, in Cincinnati in 2001, and in more recent years, in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The enduring impact of the violence of the 60s and 70s has been felt more regularly and more acutely by black people in American cities who faced new policing practices that emerged under the banner of the war on crime. The routine stop and frisks that attacked people's dignity, the breaking up of community gatherings, the presence of armed, uniformed officers in the hallways of under-resourced public schools, and more. Such strategies help repress mass violence as a regular phenomenon, but they ironically made further riots inevitable. Those strategies remain in place today. The book, America on Fire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. The second hour of our program here is the Republican argument against women voting getting new traction. I mean, by the way, that's the title of my op-ed over at HartmannReport.com today. The Republican nominee for governor of North Carolina. By the way, this guy is or was the lieutenant governor, Mark Robinson. And when he was running for lieutenant governor, weirdly, in a speech before the Republican women of Pitt County in March of 2020, he won the race. I mean, he became lieutenant governor. He came right out and said, "I absolutely want to go back to the America where women can't vote." And he then goes into this riff about, social change and stuff. But I mean, it's just weird. But this is nothing new. I mean, Ann Coulter just 4 months ago said, "Once again, it's time to reconsider our rash experiment with women's suffrage." Michigan Republican John Gibbs, who was the official candidate for Michigan's 3rd district. He didn't win. He was beat by a Democrat, but he was in the race. He won the primary. Had laid out a website some years ago arguing that it is, that we should that we shouldn't allow women to vote. Period. I mean, in 1923, the Equal Rights Amendment was first proposed. It passed the House of Representatives in 1973, but every year in the Senate, it gets blocked by a Republican filibuster. Republicans just basically hate women and don't want them to have equal rights, and certainly don't want them to vote. So how has this been playing out? Well, it turns out that the Republican anti-voting legislation, the voter suppression legislation, principally voter ID legislation. There's been a lot of conversation on this program and in many other venues about how badly that hits people of color, particularly black people and Hispanic people. There's very little discussion about how it impacts women. But the fact of the matter is that many women, as many as a third of America's married women in America, do not have ID that in those Republican states that have strict ID requirements. And there's a bunch of the strictest ones are Arkansas, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. In those states where you can be called upon to present your birth certificate to vote along with your driver's license, if your birth certificate has your maiden name and your driver's license has your married name, and you cannot present a piece of paper showing that you legally changed your name with the state, they don't let you vote. And I mean, this is in Texas, for example, a district court judge, Sandra Watts, was turned away from voting because one of her documents had her maiden name as her middle name, and another one had her, her birth middle name as her middle name. Had she not been a judge, had she not known, I mean, she's a district judge, right? She knew how to use the system. But had she not been, she probably would have done what many women in this circumstance do. They just say, okay, I'm just going to stop voting. I mean, this is from the Brennan Center, okay? A solid, credible group. Voter ID laws have a disproportionately negative effect on women, they write. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, 1/3 of all women, this is from the National Organization for Women citing the Brennan Center. 1/3 of all women have citizenship documents that do not identically match their current names, primarily because of name change at marriage. About 90% of women who marry in the United States adopt their husband's name. That means, they write, that roughly 90% of married female voters have a different name on their ID than the one on their birth certificate, and an estimated 34% of American women could be turned away at the polls unless they have precisely the right documents. Now, in many of these states, they have not been strictly enforcing this. They've just been letting people vote, basically. But now that abortion is going to be a major deciding factor in the election this fall, in those states that have these strict matching requirements, you can expect to see, not just, by the way, not just married women. This also hits older voters. For example, there were 12 nuns who were all in their 80s and 90s, who were turned away from voting in Indiana. Excuse me. And why were they turned away from voting? Because their driver's licenses, which they all had, and passports, which they all had, were all out of date because they weren't traveling anymore, they weren't driving anymore, and so they hadn't bothered to renew them. And the Secretary of State at the time, Ted Rokita, bragged about this. He says, Indiana's voter ID law applies to everyone. From all accounts that we've heard, the sisters were aware of the photo ID requirements and chose not to follow them. Right. Women are the largest group of registered voters, and they tend to turn out at high levels, so nationwide around 68.4%, much higher than men. But Republicans are using every trick in the book to try to, number one, suppress the votes of people of color, but number two, or actually I think you could flip this upside down. Number one, suppress the votes of women, and number two, suppress the votes of people of color. So if you live in one of these states that have these strict requirements, these particularly the ones that say, you know, if you've got a period after your middle initial on your driver's license and there's no period after your middle initial on your passport or something, or on, you know, on whatever other piece of documentation you have. I guess it wouldn't be on the passport because they require you to fill out your full middle name, but you get my point. If there is any inconsistency at all between the two types of ID that you must present, they don't let you vote. And there's a lot of women who are going to be confronting that this November. So if you are a woman and you live in one of those states, forewarned is forearmed. Make sure that your ID is all, you know, nice and tight. That you know, if your birth certificate has your maiden name and your driver's license has your married name, be sure that you have some sort of proof that you got married. And if you changed your name legally, and in some states you're going to have to prove that you actually petitioned the state for a name change. Most women never do that, by the way. They simply start using their married name. And, you know, everybody has just kind of let it slide by. It's technically illegal. Technically, you have to apply for a name change. But I'd say probably 95% of all women who change their names when they get married don't do that. And this could, you know, come back and haunt them when it comes time to vote. And by the way, this entire voter ID thing is just complete BS. I mean, there was 250,000 people who voted in the primaries and the general election in 2020, and there were 194 convictions for voter fraud. Voter fraud does not exist in any democracy anywhere in the world. It never has. It's such a small and inconsequential thing. And it's usually by mistake. It's usually people who think they're eligible to vote but aren't. But the Republicans saw this as a tool that they could use. This started in Indiana. In 2006, in Indiana was the first state in 2006 to require voter ID. Prior to that, there was no requirement. Because, you know, who's going to go to the trouble of lying about who they are to vote? I mean, the impact on the election is negligible. Yes, we want our voice counted, but, I mean, who does that? Nobody, or very few people, so few people. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be caught voting, or than you are to be voting illegally or committing voter fraud. But what they did in Indiana is they looked at the numbers, the Republicans, and what they found was that, let me see if I can get the exact data here. I mean, it's pretty, here it is. 34% of American women don't have government-issued ID with their current legal name on it. 25% of vote-eligible blacks don't have voter ID. And 18% of Social Security voting senior citizens don't have ID, whereas only about 4% of white men don't have that kind of ID. So the Republicans looked at this and said, hey, if we want more white men to vote and we want fewer women and black people and elderly people to vote, this is easy. We just require voter ID. And like I said, Indiana was the first to do it in 2006. It's been, what, 18 years? Yeah, 18 years now. And now pretty much every red state has done this. Not every state does, but certainly every red state does. And this is their big scam to prevent women from voting. Meanwhile, the Republican Party has become a full-fledged anti-sex movement, according to Rebecca Solnit over at The Guardian. After Alito and Clarence Thomas both cited the Comstock Act, and recently, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. And now they're basically declaring war on Planned Parenthood and, of course, abortion. She writes, the assumption that these norms will, the current norms, that women have the right to vote, that women have, women have access to birth control, that women have access to abortion. The assumption that norms will persist is these days a dangerous obtuseness, whether it's about climate, domestic policy, society, or the international order. And she talks about the backlash to Roe, to Roe being overturned in June of 2022. But she said that doesn't spare women in red states from the horrific consequences of the decision. And that includes prosecution for miscarriages. Mark Joseph Stern, for example, tweeted on 27 March, the anti-abortion movement's end goal is to let doctors refuse treatment, including life-saving emergency care, for patients whom they deem to be sinful and morally impure. In May of 2023, the Heritage Foundation declared on social media, quote, conservatives have to lead the way in restoring sex to its true purpose and ending recreational sex and senseless use of birth control pills. Right. This is the Heritage Foundation. Project 2025 declares the USAID Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment should remove all language on USAID websites, in agency publications and policies, and in all agency contacts and grants that include the terms gender and gender equality, and should also remove references to sexual and reproductive rights. Women, the Republicans have put a bullseye on your back. Wake up, pay attention. This is a big deal, and I'm telling you, you're going to see massive voter suppression this November, and we need to get ready for it. Donald Trump, it turns out, became a billionaire, a real billionaire, with this Trump World, the DJT stock. How did they get there? Well, it turns out that there's some rather skeezy characters and a Russian oligarch involved.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll tell you about that right after this. Stay with us. And welcome back. Joe in Oklahoma City. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Man, fantastic program as always.
Thank you.
Always amazed to listen at your genius and the passages you read from books. It's really enlightening. I've actually bought a few books. I'm not a big-time reader, but after hearing some of the stuff you've read, I've ordered the books, and they're just amazing, cool. Including your own books. Let me just say this. I know that there's kind of a youth vote that's kind of turning away from Biden over a single issue, which is the Gaza issue. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Bernie or bust movement, where the youth, because they thought, well, we'll go for it. And then when they realized how bad Trump was, that youth vote totally went for Dems after that and ever since. And this is kind of another defining moment. I just wanted to make sure that your listeners can spread the message that we can't make it just about Gaza. We're talking about women's rights in the balance, any kind of sensible gun laws, the minimum wage coming up from its ridiculous point, the pro-rich tax cuts, which Trump will do again, their deregulation, which kind of is causal in the train derailments and some of the chemical poisonings in Texas, where if business is going to make more money by not taking care of their products they put on the public, then people are going to get sick and die. These are really serious things that another Trump administration, especially with kind of a theocratic bent, is going to do to gay rights. And let's not mention the climate. I mean, Gaza, yes, it's terrible. Yes, there's some crazy things in there, but we have to keep in mind, Trump will be worse than Biden when it comes to the treatment of to the people living in Gaza, the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And one thing, I didn't know if you had known this, but the billionaire that helped Trump by merging the ByteDance with the Truth Social.
Yeah, Jeff Yazd.
The guy named, yes. But did you know that he's very highly tied to the Likud party and Benjamin Nutcase?
No, I didn't.
And this has been proven out. I read a couple of articles from Middle East newspaper stuff where they were saying that some of the big money meetings on the Israeli side with Bibi Netanyahu was in attendance. So he's knee deep with the Likud
Well, the only
party.
comment that Trump has made on this is that they need to get it over with, right? And you can interpret that in a variety of ways. I think that the way that some people, certainly the followers of Netanyahu, are interpreting it is, kill as many Gazans as possible.
And that would follow with, Trump changing his position on TikTok because Yas is tied to ByteDance, who owns TikTok primarily. And you can see that would be, if Yas is involved with Likud and he's been attending their money meetings, which is what this is all about, Trump will surely side there. And if they think it's bad for the Palestinians now, Joe Biden is just trying to do a balancing act here. And he's got a lot of pulling interests.
I got it. I get it. Joe, thank you. Thank you for a rational voice. I appreciate it. 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with how Donald Trump got rich with the Russian mob right after this. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So right-wing billionaires are major funders of the GOP, and the GOP has been promoting basically a death cult. You got Ron DeSantis most recently signing a law that eliminates legal liability for medical professionals who refuse to provide services to people in crisis if it violates their moral, ethical, or religious convictions. The Republican Party has picked up from the Democrats, actually, ironically, weirdly, the old Dixiecrats, the old Southern racists. They used to be Democrats prior to 1964, but then the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that. And Nixon came in along in '68 with the Southern strategy, and now they're all Republicans. So why are these right-wing billionaires willing to support this death cult? Is it really just about taxes and deregulation? There's a piece about it at thehartmannreport.com. Check it out. 3 minutes past the hour. Oh, a couple of things with regard to Trump and his social media platform that is now theoretically worth billions and billions of dollars. First of all, this breaking news from CNN, literally just from a few minutes ago. Florida venture capitalist Michael Schwartzman and his brother Gerald Schwartzman pleaded guilty on Wednesday, today, to participating in an insider trading scheme linked to the deal that brought former President Donald Trump's social media business public. Each of the brothers pleaded guilty in New York to one count of securities fraud. They're looking at 20 years in prison. Amazing. But here, now, the Guardian piece is even more shocking. The headline, this is by Hugo Lowell, exclusive, Trump media saved in 2022 by Russian American under criminal investigation. And this is the bottom line, that this merger between Trump Media and Technology Group and Digital World Acquisition Corp, this SPAC, almost didn't make it. In 2021, the securities investigators or security regulators were looking into this, and they didn't have really enough money to make this deal work. It didn't meet the requirements. And so, quoting The Guardian, quoting Hugo Lowell, the situation led Trump Media to take emergency loans, including from an entity called ES Family Trust, which opened an account with Paxum Bank, a small bank registered in the Caribbean island of Dominica that is best known for providing financial services to the porn industry. Now, who created this account with this bank? And by the way, this bank doesn't do loans. So it can't do loans in the United States. So this, through leaked documents, The Guardian has learned that ES Family Trust operated like a shell company for a Russian-American businessman named Anton Postolnikov, who co-owns Paxum Bank and has been a subject of a years-long federal criminal investigation by the FBI. Paxum Bank does not offer loans in the U.S. as it lacks a U.S. banking license and is not regulated by the FDIC. Postolnikov appears to have used the trust to loan money to help save Trump Media and the Trump social platform because the bank itself couldn't furnish the loan. He is the nephew of Alexander Smirnov. Remember Smirnov, the last Russian scandal? Who is good friends with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So a lawyer in Dominica representing Paxum Bank warned of legal action for reporting the contents of the leaked documents. So I guess the Guardian is on notice, but Postolnikov has been listed on several search warrant affidavits. So this is getting weird. You've got a Russian-American businessman, a very, very wealthy guy, who is setting up a family trust in Dominica to use as a money laundering operation, apparently. I mean, or something like that. It kind of looks like that. To shovel money into Donald Trump's company. Now, which raises the question, was this an investment? Was this a good idea? I mean, it might well have been, because now that company's worth billions of dollars. Or was it just another Russian attempt to keep Donald Trump afloat and shovel money into his pockets? Or both? I don't know the answer to any of those questions, but I do think it's fascinating. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where despair is not an option. I'll be back with your calls in just a moment. But to start out, the acceleration of the new right. Book club is The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff, with a foreword by Richard Clark. This is from the foreword. For some Americans, George W. Bush looks good by comparison to the incumbent, Donald Trump. In his post-presidency, Bush has devoted himself to worthy causes and acted in a bipartisan manner. The 43rd president should, however, be judged not by comparison to America's worst president, nor by what Bush may have done after leaving office. He should be evaluated for his actions in office, his nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. This volume from Stephen Markoff provides the evidence for such an evaluation. You can judge for yourself. For me, there is little doubt. I, unfortunately, witnessed Bush and his administration make many of their most cataclysmic decisions. I was in the room when some of them occurred. When in December 2000, the Supreme Court of the United States decided on a 5-4 vote that George W. Bush would become the 43rd president, I was the Special Assistant to the President for National Security and National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism for President William J. Clinton. I anticipated leaving the White House on January 20th, 2001, when the Clinton presidency ended. However, I was asked by the incoming administration to stay on for an unspecified period because, as it was explained to me, there was no one on Bush's incoming team who knew much about terrorism or who wanted my job. Departing Clinton administration officials stressed to the newly arriving Bush team and to Bush himself the importance and urgency of dealing with the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. Indeed, the Clinton administration had developed an extensive series of further steps to combat al-Qaeda that it would have taken had it continued in office, or indeed had Vice President Al Gore assumed office in 2001. Within days of Bush's inauguration, I asked for an urgent meeting at the cabinet level to review both the threat and the plan to ratchet up the measures against al-Qaeda. No such meeting occurred until a week before 9/11, and that meeting was inconclusive. From January 2001 through the second week in September, Bush personally received frequent intelligence warnings that al-Qaeda posed an imminent threat. He convened no meetings to address the issue. His inner circle of national security advisors did nothing, despite frequent urgings by the CIA director and the national coordinator, including such vivid imagery as our asking in writing that they consider a near future in which there would be hundreds of dead bodies in the streets of America. Instead, they focused on Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Bush's nonfeasance cost American lives. Following the deaths of over 3,000 innocent civilians on 9/11, the Bush administration attempted to tie the al-Qaeda attack to Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Despite CIA and FBI analyses that reiterated Iraq's non-involvement, the Bush administration almost immediately followed the 9/11 attack by beginning to make plans to invade Iraq. Senior Bush officials spoke privately of the need to demonstrate our strength in the wake of the 9/11 attack, show our might by destroying the largest army in the Middle East, and thereby also prove our willingness to take U.S. military casualties to achieve our ends. Prior to 9/11, foreign terrorists who had attacked Americans had been successfully sought out throughout the world and arrested by U.S. law enforcement authorities, assisted by the intelligence community. Many terrorists had been returned to U.S. territory, given their Miranda rights, provided with counsel, tried in our civilian criminal courts, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in maximum security prison cells. One, tried by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was executed. Despite this record, the Bush administration abandoned criminal process and established its own extrajudicial system for dealing with terrorists post 9/11. That new system used techniques that any objective observer would judge were torture. Perhaps the most well-known torture technique was the procedure known as waterboarding. The United States government had tried World War II Japanese military personnel for using the exact same technique. They were found guilty, and some were executed by hanging. The United States Senate's Committee on Intelligence conducted the most extensive oversight and investigation and examination in its history on the issue of torture during the Bush administration. That voluminous study concluded that torture was employed and that it had not, despite administration claims to the contrary, uniquely revealed information that had prevented terrorist attacks. To the contrary, it showed that tortured prisoners, unable to satisfy their interrogators with information that the terrorists did not know, instead guessed at what kind of story would stop the torture and then fabricated information of the kind they thought their prosecutors wanted to hear. Bush was not only aware of the torture, he approved it. His role in giving authorization for such acts can rightly be considered criminal malfeasance, as should his orders to invade Iraq. Among the many justifications the Bush administration considered for their invasion and occupation of Iraq, they chose finally to make the alleged weapons of mass destruction existence their chief complaint. The book, The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. What a day, huh? What an incredible day. Trump is now saying, Judge Merchan should recuse himself from this case. Right. After he attacks the guy's daughter. right? Incredible. James in Hollywood. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor, still the smartest man in all media. This call goes out to all your wonderful students and listeners who are in world peace through music, rhythm, and harmony. We don't need to be burning humans alive for power and profit. Anyhow, if everyone in the sound of my voice, Morris and Congressman's aides are listening, the latter should write 2 sentences. The USA will never give you, Netanyahu, another bomb, bullet, rocket, or dollar until there's an immediate ceasefire allowing all humanitarian aid, land, sea, and air, until all wounded and starving people, men, women, and children and infants are cared for. Netanyahu, you have 24 hours to respond.
Yeah, I would like to see something like that too, James. James, thank you very much. Bill in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. Well, I want to bring up something that hopefully you can talk about more. It's a bill called the Big Wires Act. That's the acronym. And what this does is it requires the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to have a more integrated electrical grid. And to do that, they will have to modernize the grid. And to do that will actually save consumers at least $300 million a year. And if it does what it's supposed to do and reduces CO2 emissions, it'll be more.
Isn't this the legislation that Al Gore was talking about 3 or 4 years ago?
I don't know that. Hickenlooper has introduced it in the Senate. It's S-2827. And
in the U.S. Senate?
Peters, yep. And Peters introduced it in the House. It's H.R. 5551. Mm-hmm. And there's a very recent article published by people at MIT that show that this could reduce CO2 emissions, that it'll increase the resiliency of the electrical grid. Right. And the idea of this is it requires these regional electrical groups to be able to transmit 30% of their peak energy to another regional grid when there's a need.
My understanding is that
extreme storm or fire or something like that.
The for-profit electrical generating industry is opposed to this. Do I recall that correctly?
I don't think so. They're actually moving in that direction.
Okay.
But
Good.
You might want to get Hickenlooper or Peters on to talk about this. Mm-hmm. This is a big deal for the Citizens Climate Lobby to try to push, and it doesn't require changing how electricity is generated, mm-hmm. which I think is a thing for conservatives to think about. It does save consumers money, and it modernizes the electrical grid. I mean, I think that this is a lot of positive stuff. Well, it could be. It could be. But those are the two guys that have introduced this into Congress. It's really gone nowhere to this point. It was introduced in the fall of last year.
Okay, I'll check it out.
And given the craziness that goes on, it may not go anywhere. But I would certainly check that out.
Yeah, don't count on anything coming out of the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. I get your point.
I agree with you.
Bill, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Beth in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Beth, what's on your mind today?
Hi. We keep hearing about people with student loans ending up owing thousands more than what they started out with, and they're already in their 50s and 60s and so forth.
Yeah, in some cases, tens of thousands.
And I just was curious about your input. What would it do to have a bill to require that federally supported student loans be simple interest instead of this compounding situation that we have now?
Or if they're federally supported loans, why any interest at all?
Well, yes. I mean, there is that. But
I remember when this first rolled out, it was during the Clinton administration that the government was going to get into the loan business, essentially the student loan business, because pressure was building since Reagan cut all that support for college. And Clinton was making the point that this will show a profit for the government. Like, that's a good thing, right? but it's a profit at the expense of students. So yeah, I like your idea, Beth. I think that we should go a whole step farther. We should do what every other developed democracy in the world has done, which is make college free. I mean, yes, in every other country there are elite universities, private schools and whatnot that do charge a lot of money. But every other outside the United States, every other democracy in the world has provides the ability of the average student to attend college at no cost, in some cases even subsidized, in a half a dozen countries in Europe.
Yeah, I lived in France for a year back in 1960-61, and the older students in my family, I was an exchange student, they received stipends way back then.
Yep.
I mean, I guess we should, maybe we can just go for broke and then have this as a fallback. I don't know. It just seemed like something that might have less.
It used to be that way in the United States. We used to pay about 80% of the cost of a college education was paid for by state, federal, and local governments, and endowments, but mostly state, federal, and local governments. Now that is, and 20% was paid by students, and that's why my mom was able to graduate from Michigan State University magna cum laude back in 1941 or 2 or something like that. Because and she put her way through school working propping as a lifeguard up in Charlevoix, and propping planes at the Lansing Airport on weekends. And washing and propping. This is back in the days when somebody had to spin the propeller. She was poor, and she could go to college. She could graduate from a major college. That all went away with the Reagan Revolution, and I think we need to bring it back. Beth, thank you. Thanks for calling and bringing up a topic that is near to my heart. I appreciate it. Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom.
Hey.
Talking about the World Central Kitchen, the assassination of those 7 workers.
Yep, and that's a good word for it.
I hesitate to use it, but
these were precision-guided munitions. This was not an accidental murder.
No, absolutely not.
And before you shoot lethal weaponry at people, you have an obligation to confirm who they are.
I'm a retired staff sergeant. Okay, I know this stuff.
Yeah.
They did that intentionally.
I believe so. They have killed a whole bunch of aid workers. There have been over 200 aid workers and hundreds of doctors and nurses who have been killed by Israeli forces. Not to mention every hospital in Gaza has been flattened.
And this is where it gets really personal. My daughter has been a traveling chef.
Mm-hmm.
She worked at a resort in Vermont on Lake Champlain.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been her.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of those people who volunteered for World Central Kitchen. I don't know if they were chefs, but they were good people. I've seen some interviews with some of the people who were killed, who were murdered in Gaza, the WC people. And, they were just young, idealistic people who wanted to save some lives.
To do good.
Yeah, exactly.
To do good.
No, Netanyahu is a psychopath, in my opinion. And he's taking down Israel with him. And I say this as somebody who has always supported Israel. This, it's a democracy. It deserves to exist. But Netanyahu is destroying that country. And in the process, destroying Joe Biden's candidacy. Michael, I got to run. I got to move along. Yeah, thank you very much. Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning again, Professor. Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but now when Trumpy is standing in front of the podium, the signage says, "Stop Biden's bloody border battle." And we already know that
he's using the word bloodbath. It's his way of shoving it in the faces of people who are offended by it.
And of course, you and I know that Moscow Mike, as you refer to him, he has the power to do it.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering how stupid are people And you already know that Trump thinks his supporters are somewhat ignorant. And I ask once again why the media doesn't point this out, the mainstream, point this out right at the top, because it's so hypocritical.
Yep.
So, and I also think that the border issue, and as we discuss more of Netanyahu's, I just think those might be really difficult issues to overcome in the next election. I hope the issues resolved.
They're going to be big challenges, Charles. But the bottom line is Donald Trump. The James Lankford, the Republican from Oklahoma, and a couple of Democrats and a couple of other Republicans got together and put forward, and then the Senate passed legislation that would basically seal up the border and hire several thousand new Border Patrol people and ICE people and speed up the time to go through the court system to find out if you qualify for what do you call it? I'm blanking on the word. Asylum, excuse me. Asylum,
yes.
Yeah, thank you. And Trump knows this. In fact, Trump came out and said, don't. He said to Moscow Mike, he said, don't allow this to pass the House of Representatives. So clearly, Trump thinks that his voters are incredibly stupid or poorly informed because he goes out and says, oh yeah, Biden's got a border bloodbath when whatever bloodbath is going on the border, arguably, could have been stopped with this legislation, and Donald Trump killed the legislation. He really, you're absolutely right, Charles. He really and truly, and thank you for the call, he really and truly does believe that his voters and potential voters are that stupid. And I guess the question is, are they? Are they really and genuinely that stupid? I mean, it sure looks like it when you look at the rally with him with this sign up, about the bloodbath on the border that he is perpetuating.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
46 minutes past the hour. Maybe some Trump voters want to call in and explain why they don't find that weird. And welcome back, Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I would just like to encourage people to call President Biden at 202-456-1111. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why President Biden thought it was the right thing to do to rearm
Israel.
Prime Minister
Netanyahu.
Beatty.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm with you.
I can't fathom it. He's a decent man, and how he thought that that's the right thing to do. And I don't care if it's some finished up policies or what. I mean, there's decency, and Biden is continuing the bloodbath.
Yeah.
And I have been behind him, 2 terms with Obama, and again, his election, I have voted Democrat, and I'm telling you, the more I think about this, the harder it is to think of voting for him.
Yeah. On the other hand, Trump totally supports Netanyahu. So if you don't vote for Biden, you're going to get Trump, and then Netanyahu is going to go in and just kill everybody.
But can you tell me why he's willing to throw away our election and democracy by making this decision that has no credibility whatsoever?
I know, Diane.
I mean,
I can only guess that his first obligation is not to respond to the political winds of the moment, but to do what's best for the United States. And Israel has been an ally of the United States ever since it was created in 1948. And you don't abandon your allies easily or quickly.
You can when they're killing innocent people.
I'm with you.
And that's the right thing. It's a humanitarian.
I'm not defending this, Diane. I'm just telling you the only possibility that I can come up with is that. I mean, I just can't. And Mark Pocan was asked the same question, and he said it's because Biden is thinking of Israel as it was 30 years ago, not as it is under Bibi Netanyahu.
Well, someone ought to school him.
Yeah.
Advise him. And the thing is, he's throwing away. I mean, can you imagine FDR helping out Hitler? I mean, and the thing of it is, they throw it.
Netanyahu is not Hitler.
Yeah.
Let's be very clear. But he is committing a
much
massive
smaller
war
scale,
crime, and
yeah.
it looks like he's on the verge of committing genocide, or is committing genocide.
He is. Yes, he is, absolutely. And here's the thing. They say, well, they started it. Hamas is a terrorist group, and they started it. If Iceland asked us for land in America because the volcanoes are covering their island, and we said, yeah, okay, they moved in and started taking up more and more of our country, our space, our land. I mean, at some point, we would push back, too. And they've been doing this since 1948, eating up Palestinian land. And now their motto is to the sea. They want to push the Palestinians totally off. And I have no, I'm Judeo-Christian. I just can't, I don't, I understand that. But they are acting very Christian, and I don't like there seems to be two sides of Christians. The one that, worships God, and the other one that is okay with killing.
Yeah, I get it. Diane, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. I share your outrage. I genuinely do. And the United States has to stop supporting Netanyahu. It's just that simple. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order. And, as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Let's see here, picking up your calls. David in northern Cook County, Illinois. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's good to be talking to you. I've long been a fan.
Thank you.
I have a comment following on the earlier caller who spoke with the congressperson from Wisconsin. And I know you've got a background. I read your book on peak oil long ago and appreciate
Last Hours of Ancient
much.
Sunlight, yeah.
Yes. So here's the point, and then if there's a moment, I'll share a couple of resources for folks. Right now, yes, the current nuclear legislation that's in front of Congress and, frankly, in front of many state legislators across the country is a huge bailout for the industry, not only here but globally, if you look at what the coalition at COP28 managed to pull off in trying to leverage money from the World Bank, which has never been devoted to nuclear before. Now, the reason this is important, in addition to the renewal of the Price-Anderson Act and all of these bailout provisions, essentially, that, again, I know you're familiar with, there's an historical point I wanted to make, and then some detail. Back at Port Huron, and I know you were part of some of that history, when the anti-war movement was getting started in the 60s, they were actually pretty pro-nuclear. They were kind of into scientism and those sort of solutions. And it took the evolution of the environmental movement through the 60s and early 70s for people to make the connections with corporatism, with environmental
we were still getting the ads from the nuclear industry that soon electricity would be free. I remember as a kid, we used to go down to the power company and turn in our light bulbs, our burned out light bulbs, and they give us free brand new light bulbs. Because someday it's all going to be free.
Right. And interestingly, right now, what's happening with Sunrise Movement and other movements, the environmental movement, is they're moving into this protest space around Gaza. They're making connections around militarism and militarized corporate interests, and connecting environmentalism and peace movement and anti-war movement in a way which hasn't happened for a generation, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is something that the administration and others are underestimating in terms of the power of these movements learning, as people do when they're in movement, about the connections between issues.
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to share a couple of resources and then a little detail if there's time. I'd suggest people take a look at beyondnuclear.org.
Yeah, we have them on the program about once a month.
That's great.
Yeah.
And the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, of course.
Yeah.
For critical views. Now, the critical views are being excluded. New York Times did an investigative report last year that documented the defunding of critical nuclear voices in the sciences and environmental movement massively. Part of what's going on as well is DOE has, by the Nuclear Information Resource Service estimate, $100 million in propaganda from DOE.
Yeah,
and
DOE is a cheerleader for it. David, I've got to move along, but your points are all really well taken, and we'll continue to have Beyond Nuclear on the program regularly. Thank you. Troy in Tryon, North Carolina. Hey, Troy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I would first of all like to thank you and Free Speech TV for bringing some truth through my television. What I want to say is the economic basis for the continued ethnic cleansing of Gaza seems to be the 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas offshore of Gaza that has been assessed to belong to the Palestinian people. Should he get the Gazans to leave and annex Gaza, then Israel gets to claim that as their natural gas. And
Is that natural gas field definite, or is it anticipated?
It is definite. It is underwater. You can look it up, natural gas offshore Gaza. And to back this up is the fact that Israel is now drilling for natural gas in the West Bank under cover of the settlement annexation of land there. And so this is the same process.
Yeah. That's not good. That's not healthy.
No.
Where can I learn more about that, Troy?
I just looked it up with on Google search under natural gas Gaza.
Yeah, okay, I'll do the same. Troy, thank you for the call.
Thanks.
And the heads up. Coming up on the other side of this break, Jack Smith responds to Aileen Cannon's craziness. There's a legal nuance here that I find absolutely fascinating, and I think I understand it. I may be wrong, and I'd like to share it with you and bounce it around. Also, if you make Trump $6 billion, you can bet he's going to try to screw you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at Thom Hartmann. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. Providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So welcome to the third hour of our program. The Jack Smith, Donald Trump, Aileen Cannon saga continues. You'll recall this is the Espionage Act violations by Donald Trump. He stole a bunch of national security documents. Many of them were classified. Many of them weren't, but they still were not his property. They were national security documents. They are the property of the U.S. government. He stole them. He took them to Florida. He lied about where he had them or that he had them. He had people move them around to avoid the FBI finding them. Clearly, he thinks these things have value. And there was this giant copy machine, this giant industrial-sized copier in the room where he was storing these documents. God only knows what he did with them or how many of them have ended up in Vladimir Putin's desk. Or Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, what role did these documents play in the $2 billion that Jared got? So anyhow, there's this case where Jack Smith is trying to hold him to account for this theft. And Judge Cannon asked Jack Smith and Donald Trump to propose language for the jury instructions that basically said, under the Presidential Records Act, Donald Trump had the power and legal authority, I'm paraphrasing here, and legal authority to declassify any kind of document. Therefore, do you think he should be held guilty for having classified documents that he had the legal right to declassify? That's the essence of the, which of course would, if I was on a jury and those are my jury instructions, it would be, hey, he's not guilty. If he has the ability to declassify these things and you're prosecuting him for holding on to classified documents, but see, that's not what he's being prosecuted for. He's being prosecuted for stealing national security documents, which is a completely different thing than the Presidential Records Act. He is not being prosecuted under the Presidential Records Act. But Aileen Cannon is saying, hey, under the Presidential Records Act, where did this come from? Well, it turns out that this came from this guy, this wacky theory. This came from this guy who posted it on Twitter, of all things, on February 8th, 2022. And this was, yeah, it was the president of Judicial Watch. And apparently, who's, by the way, not an attorney. And apparently this is what Aileen Cannon is going to go with, or says that she wants to go with. Now, Jack Smith pushed back today and said, wait a minute, if you're going to ask for those jury instructions, that means that you're asking that this case be litigated around the Presidential Records Act, not the Presidential Records Act, not the specific things that have to do with espionage, the Espionage Act. And therefore, please tell me, what's the legal basis for this case that you see, essentially. Now, the problem that Jack Smith has, he could get Aileen Cannon kicked out of the case. To do that, though, he would have to make an appeal to the 11th Circuit Court, which has already turned her down twice, has reversed her twice, and maybe third time is a charm. But, and this is where I'm not certain that I'm certain about this, but I believe I understand this because I've read probably 20 pieces now in the last 48 hours about this. Marcy Wheeler's over at emptywheel.net was probably the most informative. But what I'm understanding, and those of you who are lawyers out there, feel free to call in and set me straight if I've got this wrong, is that you can't appeal a question or a recommendation by a judge to a higher court. You can only appeal a ruling. And from what I've read, these proposed jury instructions were not a ruling. Now, there is a diary over on Daily Codes that uses the word ruling to describe it repeatedly. I think the guy is wrong, but I might be wrong myself. That's the only thing I've seen that suggests that this is actually a ruling. What everybody else seems to be saying is that Jack Smith is like in a world of trouble here because Aileen Cannon is being really sneaky or really, I don't know, maybe sneaky is not the right word, but very legalistic by saying that I'm just asking questions and I'm just making suggestions. I'm not making a ruling so that she can't be appealed, so that she can't be removed from the case. So I just find it, fascinating and weird and, what the heck is going on with all this? So we'll see. We'll see where this goes. Meanwhile, I mentioned in my tease, I said, or my preview of what was coming up, I said, if you make Trump, even if you make Trump $6 billion, he's still going to try to screw you. Well, sure enough, Andy Latinsky and Wes Moss were the guys who figured that they could take the code, the source code from Mastodon, which is open source, right? Anybody can copy it and use it for anything they want. They took the source code from Mastodon, tweaked it just a very little bit, and instead of putting it on a public server or multiple public servers like Mastodon is, so it's kind of crowdsourced, they put it on a private server. So Trump Social is owned, and it's a walled garden, essentially. So those are the guys who did this, and they did this for Donald Trump. And the deal was that they would get 8.6% of the company. And their 8.6% of the company right now is worth $606 million. So, but Donald Trump wants it all. He's got 56% of the company right now, 57% of the company. And he wants their 8% too. So he's suing them, saying that they don't have the right to anything. It's all mine, says Donald Trump. I don't think that Donald Trump has ever had a business partner that he hasn't screwed. He had partners in the casinos. He sued them all. Deutsche Bank loaned him hundreds of millions of dollars. He couldn't pay it back. This was back in the 90s. He sued Deutsche Bank. And then after that, they continue to loan him money. It's like, sir, yes, paddle me again. But, I guess the bottom line is anybody who thinks that they can trust Donald Trump and based on that belief gets into bed with him, gets into business with him, deserves what they get. For stupidity, if no other reason. But poor Andy and Wes, they are in the midst of a major legal battle. And the only asset that these guys appear to have, or the only major asset that they have, is this stock that Donald Trump is trying to take away from them. Amazing. Speaking of Trump lying, is there no bottom? There was this young woman. Her name is Ruby Garcia, 25-year-old, who was shot by her boyfriend, whose name was, got to find it here, Brandon Ortiz Vite. So Brandon kills Ruby, shoots and kills Ruby. Turns out Brandon is not here with documentation. They're both Hispanic. Brandon is here illegally, in quotes. And so Trump goes to make a big deal out of this. And yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, I believe it was yesterday, gave this speech in Grand Rapids where he said, she lit up the room. And I've heard that from so many people. I spoke to some of her family. So he's trying to embrace Ruby, the woman who was killed by the illegal immigrant, right? As a way of, kind of horse vesseling her, making her a martyr to the cause. Poor Ruby. And I've talked to her family, and they said that she just lit up the room. Well, it turns out that she lit up the room phrase came from her obituary, and that the family is now coming out publicly and saying, we never talked to Donald Trump. He never reached out to us. He's lying through his teeth. And they're a little offended because they're Hispanic and Trump is trashing Hispanic people regularly. And so Mavi Garcia, the sister of Ruby, told Target 8, a local television station up there in Grand Rapids, said it's always been about illegal immigrants. Nobody really speaks about when Americans do heinous crimes, and it's kind of shocking why he would just bring up illegals. What about Americans who do heinous crimes like that? Indeed. What about Americans? The fact of the matter is that people who are in this country without documentation are less likely to commit a crime than those people who are in this country legally, like you and me. In fact, those cities that Republicans in Texas and Florida have been busing and flying illegal immigrants. Now, these are not illegal, by the way. These are people who have been processed by ICE, and they're waiting their asylum claims. But that those cities that have been receiving these people have actually been seeing their crime rates go down ever since they started shipping them into those cities. Now, I'm not sure that there's anything more than correlation here. I'm not sure that there's causation. But it sure flies in the face of Donald Trump's claim that there's, bloodbath and there's a crime, Biden crime epidemic and all this kind of nonsense. He's just literally lying through his teeth. I guess it is literal. That's how you lie, is through your teeth. But it's just, which brings us back to this question, how stupid does Donald Trump think that his voters are? I am convinced that he thinks that they will buy anything he has to sell. Hey, you want a Bible? I got a Bible. You want some gold tennis shoes? I got some gold tennis. It's crazy. 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And now I will pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Tom in Seattle. Hey, Tom, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Yeah, this is a question, not a statement, but and I agree with you. Israel has a lot to answer for, but I think the Palestinians have been so radicalized and traumatized. I mean, supposedly 80% of them support Hamas.
Well, Hamas had been running the hospitals. Hamas had been feeding them. Hamas had been running their social security system. Hamas had been running their unemployment system. So it makes sense that people would support Hamas. Whether they're supporting Hamas's, anti-Israel policies is a whole nother question, Tom.
Well,
although Israel has
Hamas
turned this into an open-air prison for the last 30, 40 years, so they may well support those policies too. Does that mean that you bomb them?
Hamas attacked Israel back in 2007. Did the Palestinians say, oh, boy, we got revenge on those Israelis? Or did they say, oh, now we're really going to take it? We're going to be bombed?
I don't know, but what I do know for sure is that from that time until October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu had been funneling money to Hamas. He had been supporting Hamas more vigorously than the Palestinian people were because they don't have the money.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Should Netanyahu bomb himself? I mean, he's been Hamas's number one supporter for the last 2 decades.
Yeah. Okay, well, it looks like the Palestinians are really acting against their own best interests.
I don't think that they, you don't have a free press in Gaza. You don't have, a well-informed populace. I just don't think people, people can look beyond the fact that they're hungry or that they need housing or that they've basically been in prison for 30, 40 years. Which is not to, I'm in no way trying to justify what happened on October 7th. It's reprehensible, and there needs to be a response to it. But this response is way beyond the pale. Tom, thank you for the call. Sally in Carlsbad, California. Hey, Sally, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I've been enjoying the show. I just want to, I could talk about two things, but I'll stick with the border because I've had a lot of experience with that situation because I was a district attorney in San Diego, so I saw a lot of different criminal things, in court involving that. But one of the things is, my suggestion is, I'm a Democrat, liberal, is that, on the border, that's going to be, Trump's calling card, up until the election, and they're going to show visuals of streams of people coming across, cutting fences and all that kind of stuff, which is emotional. They're trying to get people.
Sally, I just have 16 seconds. What's the point you're trying to make?
Okay. Here it is. I think that Democrats should send people down at the border just at least once a week and say, hey, we want to solve this problem alongside you.
I agree with you.
We're into law and order, too.
I agree with you. Democrats don't know how to do political theater. They need to learn.
It's just stating the truth. That, hey, we want to work with the Republicans. We want to solve this issue together.
Yep. Amen. I completely agree, Sally.
They don't want to.
And Biden went down there once. President Biden went down there once. But I agree with you. There needs to be Democrats down there, every week or every couple of weeks, bringing this issue back up so that Trump can't continue to lie about it. Sally, brilliant. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back, 21 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here at 22 minutes past the hour. Tom in Mossy Head, Florida. Hey, Tom. How you doing? What's up?
Hey, got a little geeky medical science for you today.
Okay.
I think the last time we spoke, I was not really kidding, but I was saying that your voice helps me sleep. Well, a good friend of mine, she's a registered nurse and finishing up her degree in psychology. She works for a doctor that does the sleep. I don't know the word for it, where they test your sleep to see, if you have sleep apnea or whatever.
Right,
anyway, she had the equipment. Yeah, and she's brilliant, super smart lady. Anyway, she recorded some of your opening rants, and while I was asleep, she hooked me up to the machine and played one of your rants when you opened the show, and my blood pressure actually went down.
Really?
And then and then she waited a little bit until I normaled out, and then she played a Trump rally, and my blood pressure increased by 20 points.
Wow.
So she said, Tom, with your heart the way it is, don't be listening to no more Trump's crap.
I get it.
It's going to aggravate you. Yeah. So, anyway, I thought that was kind of weird.
I wonder, you see this Calm app advertised on TV, and I downloaded it and tried it out. And they've got a bunch of people reading like bedtime stories and stuff like that. But they charge for it. But I've found that typically I'll wake up a couple times every night, and if I just lay there, my mind just starts working, and a half hour goes by, and I'm still awake. Yeah. But if I put on the BBC podcast, I'm asleep in 3 minutes because that British accent, I think. I don't know. I've not tried it with any other podcast. BBC has worked so well for me. I've been using it for years. But I wonder if the popularity of podcasts, to what extent that popularity, because, there's all these podcasts out there, and it's a big business right now. You wonder to what extent the popularity of podcasts is because people are using them for sleep.
Right. They claim also that, like Calm and stuff, a couple of the other apps, they say it helps with your concentration and this and that. I'm like you, I've been into TM for a long time, meditation, and I usually try and meditate before I go to sleep. But now I've got my new TM guy. It's TH, Thom Hartmann.
Well, I'm glad it's working for you, Tom. I'm really glad. Thanks for the call. Thanks for sharing that with us. That was fascinating. I appreciate it. Catherine in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. If I could just quickly, before I make my point, ask you to please stop referring to undocumented workers as illegal aliens. There is no such thing as an illegal person. There are people that commit illegal crimes, but there's no such thing. That's a Republican talking point.
I understand.
And it really bothers me. But the reason I'm calling is I'm very, very concerned about what they are doing to students as far as voting by putting in these laws saying that they can't use their driver's license from their home state if they're going to college in another state. And my city has great transportation, so there's no reason for them to get a driver's license and then have to go back 3 months later in the summer to their home state and reapply again for another
right. And they can't use their student ID.
Yeah, they won't let them use their student ID. Right. Yet they want people to have gun IDs, just like we need more guns in this world or in this country so that people can vote. Right. I mean, is that the most ridiculous thing in the world? And we have to start fighting against that, calling the representatives in those states that are doing it, because I know darn well there's going to be an October and November surprise that they're going to start passing laws about students. I mean, they've already taken away the poll booths on campus, and they just want to shut them up because and deny them the right to vote because they know how they're going to vote. Yeah. And it's awful. They're doing the same thing with elderly. They're doing the same thing with anybody who's going to vote Democrat.
Yep, they use these ID laws to. Yep, you're absolutely right, Catherine. And I probably should have put more emphasis on those two things in my article today. Maybe I should even write a future article. Something like how the Zoomers are being targeted by the Republicans. Catherine, thank you so much. We'll be back on the other side of the break with more of your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'll be right back with you. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their health care program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer health care systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like health care card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at hartmanreport.com. And welcome Welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Bob in Farnham, Virginia. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Back in the 1970s, early part of the 70s, I read a very, very interesting book about noise and sound pollution. And one of the things that was described in the book was how the French Army was developing a weapon, an infrasonic weapon, that you could take out a platoon of men from a mile or several miles away and not destroy the terrain.
Right, it's kind of a neutron bomb using sound.
Yeah, and that takes me up to the present day, and I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes edition this past Sunday, but again, it was about Havana syndrome.
I didn't see it, but I read an article about it, so I think I understand what they said.
Wow, an FBI agent had been affected. And
it seems to point back to Moscow, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And Olivia Troy, who was from Homeland Security and advisor to Mike Pence, she was targeted right outside the White House.
Whoa.
It's pretty amazing stuff. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It's certainly worth watching the episode, and I think that, it's a serious thing that we need to pay attention to.
Okay. I will. I'm sure it lives on the internet, so I'll try to check it out. Bob, thank you for that. Ardeen in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hey, Ardeen, what's up?
Hi. You had a talker on today talking about nuclear energy and all that, and I'm totally open for, any type of improvement for energy. I grew up in Simi Valley in the 60s. I was there in the 60s, and I remember, actually it was on YouTube, they did, I think it was 58, 59. They had Moore Park, which is right next to Simi Valley. They had Moore Park online, nuclear energy, for about 30 minutes. They were all, it was really out there. It was promoted. They were really pushing, like that caller said, they were really pushing for nuclear energy in the early 60s. And then the meltdown of Rocketdyne happened. And then everything shut down.
The meltdown of what?
I remember. Huh?
Which meltdown was that?
Rocketdyne. The one that Rocketdyne, the facility that was on top of Santa Susana Mountains between the valley and Simi Valley.
Yeah.
And there was a meltdown, and they did not know how to contain it. They did not have containment facilities available at that time. Mm-hmm. And they actually, what they did, and this is horrible to say, I was doing a lot of documentaries on it, and or listening to them, and they said that they did not know how to contain it. So they actually opened up the doors, let it air out. It was 3 rods that were melted. It was like 3 weeks worth of, it was big time. And they aired it out, and they could see the jet stream flew over the valley, San Fernando Valley, and part of Simi. And it was, they cleaned it up. They told the people to clean it up with women's sanitary napkins and Bactine.
Wow. So basically their strategy was what the Japanese are doing, which is dilute it as much as possible. Only they use air instead of ocean.
They did not know. Yeah, it was They did not know anything. Incredible. And there is so much controversy, so many conspiracy things in Simi Valley. There was a lot of lawsuits against, class action for cancers, leukemias. I have a lot of friends that have died. A lot have died from it. Yeah. Like a child had brain cancer at 12. He was my brother's best friend. Wow. Instantly got brain cancer. Yeah. And and this was in the early 60s. We moved out to Simi in 62, 63. Mm-hmm. So it was right within that time period. And I remember Rocketdyne. There would be, the mountains would they would light the engines for the capsules for the space. Mm-hmm. They had 2 forms of it. They had the nuclear part, and then they had the rocket engine part. Mm-hmm. And the rocket engine part, you could see flames shooting out of the mountains. For years, and all our houses would shake and all that. The windows would rattle, and it's Rocketdyne testing their engines.
Wow.
It was weird. It was so weird.
What an amazing story. Thank you very much for calling and sharing that with us. That's fascinating. Thank you. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Well, Well, I got to tell you, I love Joe Biden, and I think that he's between a rock and a hard place.
You're
and I
talking
really
about
believe
Netanyahu?
that. Yep, I think Netanyahu is to the Israeli people now what Trump is to the American people.
Agreed.
And I think that Biden needs to realize that, because I know he's trying to protect Israelis' people, but by helping Netanyahu, it's not doing any good.
I agree. Yeah, and this is the point that Congressman Pocan made earlier. Is the phrase he used was, we need to get a divorce from Netanyahu, not Israel, but Netanyahu, because
Right.
the policies that this man is pursuing, largely to keep himself out of prison, just like
Right.
Trump is right now.
Exactly.
These guys are two peas in a pod, a couple of sociopaths. So yeah,
Yep.
I'm with you. Denise, thank you. Well said. Jeffrey in Shreveport, Louisiana. Hey, Jeffrey, what's on your mind today?
Hey, two things. Sheriff Whitehorn is now Caddo Parish's first black sheriff, and this is Speaker Johnson's parish in Louisiana. He's my congressman, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And Whitehorn won by one vote in December, and the Republican lost the recount, again by one vote.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to court and declared that dead people voted and they were voting irregularities. Well, Whitehorn won by 4,000 votes just last month, on the 23rd. And that's great. Unfortunately, there's now a precedent that a Republican has gone to court and said, hey, dead people voting irregularities, and he got what Trump wanted in 2020.
Which was?
And a revote, not a recount, but a do-over.
Oh, geez.
That's
just wrong.
So I mean, right. Even though we won, it's still a tragedy.
Yeah.
The second thing that I wanted to talk about was, oh my goodness, Netanyahu and Biden. Someone asked you why he supported Israel and gave them the weapons. Well, one, they are our ally, but two, but also, if he let up even a little bit, the Republicans would lay it on thick that he's not supporting Israel. He's
That's a good
anti-Semitic.
point too. You're right, Jeffrey.
They laid it on really thick with Obama because he was black, and supposedly black folks don't like Jews. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but Republicans, hint at all the time.
Yeah.
And that's even though Jews don't vote for Republicans. If you look it up, they don't.
Yeah, by and large, no. Jews and blacks both, majority vote for Democrats. You're absolutely right, Jeffrey, and I think that may be part of the calculus that Biden is doing, is that if he does basically abandon Netanyahu, the Republicans will come after him with knives out. My sense of it, though, is that this is not political. That this has to do with diplomacy. It goes back to the first point that you made, which is that Israel's our ally, and we have agreements with Israel, and we have long-standing agreements, and you don't just abandon that stuff instantly. On the other hand, when things reach a certain critical point, when they become essentially a crisis, you have to make hard decisions, and I have a feeling that Biden is very close to making some very, very hard decisions with regard to Israel. I hope so. We'll see.
By the way, there was one more thing I wanted to say about Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
They should stop using the word genocide. They should switch to massacre. I think that what's going on is a massacre, and that would just fit more. There'd be less pushback on it.
Yeah. Well, 30,000 people is a massacre. So, yeah, your point is well taken. Jeffrey, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Larry in Chicago. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. A few minutes ago, you mentioned about how Donald Trump screws so many of his business partners. It reminded me of here in Chicago when Trump Tower went up. Not too long after, Donald Trump sued his lender and got $400 million forgiven.
Really?
And I've always wondered, how does a bank let $400 million go?
I know. It's Well, there's like his lawsuit against Deutsche Bank. It was not the full $1 billion that he got, but he got a hell of a lot. He got several $100 million out of Deutsche Bank by suing them. It's like, and why would any bank ever do business with this guy again?
I can understand, a fine or a penalty if they went to court, unfair business, unfair loan or whatever. But, and maybe shave off $50 million as a penalty or whatever. And I don't know if $400 million was the total amount that he borrowed from that bank. But that's a lot of money. What bank would not fight that?
Yeah, you would think. But, at some point they probably figured it would cost less to, they might lose more than $400 million if they litigated it. I mean, there's reputational damage as well, But I don't, I've never interviewed one of those bankers. It would be fascinating to find out what they were thinking. Larry, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. That was fascinating. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. I'll be right back with you. Welcome back. Brian in Beverly Hills, California. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Remember a few weeks ago, it was actually before you went away, I called in and I was calling in talking about AIPAC and, their donations that they've made to various people.
Right.
And I was trying to refer to the JFK letter, and I had a brain fart, and I couldn't think of what the word I was looking out for. But what John F. Kennedy was having an issue with way back in 1963 was that he wanted the American Zionist Council, which is the parent company of AIPAC, he wanted them to register as a foreign lobby, okay? And they wouldn't do it.
Right.
They refused. And so there became a huge rift between Kennedy and the
what became
the council
AIPAC.
at the time. Yeah. Right. So, I'm not going to say any conclusion, definitely or not, but if we think about that as how can I say, like the precursor of everything that we're experiencing today. And if you look at I hate to say this, but Joe Biden is the number one recipient of AIPAC donations.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's not going to continue. But we'll see.
I hope not.
AIPAC just came out and said that they're going to dedicate, I believe it was $100 million. There's some massive amount of money to defeating progressive Democrats. And they're targeting the squad first.
Exactly. So I would say that you could almost draw a straight line from Kennedy. And the other thing is, because I looked up, I did a little bit of research on this. There was two issues. And the other issue is that Kennedy was adamant about demanding that Israel stop their nuclear testing, which they were doing at the time. And and he was arguing with Ben-Gurion at that time, and they got into such a disagreement about that.
That was a continuation of the Eisenhower thing, wasn't it? From like 1956, 57, when Eisenhower and the Egyptians. There was that whole, I forget all the details, but there was this whole kerfuffle where basically the United States did not take the side of Israel. Right.
So, you could say that Kennedy and Eisenhower, that was a great time in America for having great presidents, but it was also the end of great presidents, because from then on there, we had Carter, which was great, but he didn't really, they easily knocked him out. Then we got your favorite person, Reagan, for 8 years. And, if you'll just notice, we've never really got, as Democrats, we've never really gotten what we want.
Yeah.
We've never got, we still
I would argue that
that
Biden, setting aside his Israel policy, because I think this it's going to be temporary, but I would argue that Biden is the most progressive Democratic president we've had since Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson was the most progressive we'd had since Franklin Roosevelt.
Well, I don't know if I
look at what he's done.
I know, but what he's done, Tom, and I'm not discounting it either, and I'm not minimizing, but what he's done is mostly infrastructure, And what infrastructure does is it just keeps the trains running. But as far as like the economic things that we need as a population,
He cut child poverty in half in the United States.
Exactly. No, I'm saying economically, but I'm still saying that we have a foreign lobby that's controlling our government.
I don't disagree with that. I don't. Brian, thank you for the call. 49 minutes past the hour. Got a live. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Sonny in San Rafael. Hey, Sonny, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's been a few years since we spoke. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Really quickly, I'm going to speak about Netanyahu again.
Mm-hmm.
This is a supposition. I'd like your opinion. Many of us believe, of course, that Netanyahu would prefer Trump to be reelected.
Yes, that's clear.
And obviously, they both are facing jail time, maybe.
Yep.
And he has every incentive, in other words, to really refuse to any kind of ceasefire, to just muck it all up, because he, like Trump, is delaying.
Yep.
In the hopes that delay will result in Trump's reelection.
Yep.
Because this is very damaging to Joe Biden.
Yep.
And I just don't hear the media really pulling that thread through.
Yeah, I think there's a concern about things becoming self-generating. You know, if you say that this is damaging Biden, then it starts to damage Biden. Also, the media, you know, you've got political commentators who are horse race people, and then you've got everybody else. And it's mostly everybody else who's talking about Netanyahu, not so much the horse race people.
That's true. I just really hope that Biden can protect his...
He's going to have to change U.S. policy to Israel. He's going to have to. The question is, when is he going to do it? And you know, I think that probably November is still 8 months away, if I'm doing my math right. And I suspect that if U.S. policy changes or Netanyahu's policy changes, one or the other, between now and the end of the summer, it'll be something that Biden can recover from. But this is doing serious damage to him right now, and he needs to do something about it. Sonny, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. I think your analysis is spot on. Thank you so much. Nice to hear from you after all these years. Lawrence in Berkeley. Hey, Lawrence, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Great show.
Thank you.
I just want to enunciate the difference between a ceasefire that will be permanent and a ceasefire that will be temporary. A ceasefire that is permanent indicates that Hamas will be in power forever, because they've been in power since 2007 and, of course, have not had any elections. And if they are given a ceasefire forever, that will allow them to remain in power forever.
I don't think they're in power right now, Lawrence.
That's right. They are.
No, I do not think that they are in power right now. I think that their power over that country or over Gaza has been largely shattered. They're hiding out.
In power and, yeah, Hamas is still the government. If there's a permanent ceasefire,
there's no infrastructure. There's no government. I mean, it's they've been bombed back to the Stone Age. Nobody's in charge right now. That's the problem.
Yes, it is. But if there's a permanent ceasefire now, it means that Hamas will be able to resume power.
I disagree.
And keep it.
I absolutely disagree.
If there's a temporary ceasefire, it means two things. It means, first of all, Israel can still say Hamas has to get out, and there are various options for, Hamas, what happens after Hamas, or we have the possibility of striking. But the problem is that if there's a temporary ceasefire, it will give Israelis a chance to press for a new election. And the last I heard, Netanyahu had a popularity rating of 15%.
Yeah. I think the odds of a permanent ceasefire are really, really low. And I like I said, I disagree with you about what the outcome of that would be, but that's all hypotheticals right now.
Let me just say this. Hamas has not accepted a temporary ceasefire.
I know.
And they have kept this war going as much as Israel has by refusing that. If they accepted, say, a 6-week temporary ceasefire, at least during those 6 weeks, the people of Gaza would eat.
Yeah.
And
at least in theory. I mean, right now, the
and they
food
won't
coming in is being
accept
blocked by Israel, not by Hamas.
The thing that the people who wave Palestinians' flags and are yelling genocide have to remember is that there are very few wars and very few conflicts in which one side is completely right and the other side is completely wrong.
Until after the conflict is over and the history gets written.
No, it doesn't happen very often.
No, I get it. Lawrence, I got to run. I'm sorry, we're out of time. But thank you. Thank you for the call and the thoughtful conversation. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.